Hey, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the Rantings of Danny. I'm excited about tonight's broadcast. I will tell you that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the front end of this because there is a lot to cover. As I begin broadcasting again every Monday and Thursday evenings at 8 p.m., I'm kind of finding the flow and what kind of works for me and what all do I want to include in these things. And tonight, there's a lot of information to get to. So I'm going to give it a second, just a minute to let folks get in here. And then I'm going to share with you some of the information that I have. I will tell you that some of these things I have screenshots and links to go with. I will post them directly following the broadcast. We've been having an issue with some of the comments, my links posting in the comments, but I will provide them afterwards. Same thing with some of these screenshots and this information. So as I said earlier tonight, I'm going to be talking about a couple of physicians that are associated with Ballad Health or have ties to Ballad Health and ETSU who are participating in some anti-vaccine, anti-mask, rhetoric and tours, traveling throughout the state of Tennessee. And in addition to that, in the second half of the show, later on, I'm going to be joined by a really awesome individual named Max Parthas, who is an abolitionist, who's also a poet and a spoken word artist. And we're going to talk a little bit about this new resolution that has passed the Tennessee House and that is going to be on your November 22 ballot that will abolish slavery under any and all circumstances. But before we get to all of that, let me start off by covering some of the issues that happened nationally today that I think are important to bring to everybody's attention. So the first and foremost, I'm not sure if you guys are aware or not, but Officer Gunther Hashida is a DC Metro police officer who responded to the attack on the Capitol on January the 6th. And on Thursday, July the 29th, the police department confirmed today that he was found deceased in his home as the result of a suicide. He was one of the officers that participated in the responding to the January 6th insurrection attempt, and he has now deceased. He's the third police officer since January 6th who was at the Capitol to commit suicide. He had joined the department since in May of 2003, so he was an 18-year veteran. So definitely our hearts and prayers go out to his family and to the rest of his brothers in arms who, are still there and still, protecting the Constitution and our elected leaders in the city and the nation's capital. Second, for those of y'all who saw my post earlier today, Senator Lindsey Graham has tested positive for COVID-19 after developing what he described on Twitter as flu-like symptoms. Over the weekend, he went to the doctor today and was told that he does have COVID. What he did say, in addition to that, was that he credits having been vaccinated for having mild symptoms. And he stated that he was sure that had he not been vaccinated, his symptoms would be much worse. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later on as well. And then the third thing on the national front is you all may have seen on HuffPost as well as MSNBC and some of the other networks today, GOP Representative David Byrd. If you guys remember back in the fall, he'd become very ill with COVID to the point where he was placed on a ventilator. He was in ICU. His family at one point in time faced the very real possibility of having to organize and plan his funeral. And, if you remember back last summer and early fall, he was saying, he was rejecting mask mandates. He was saying that the coverage of COVID-19 was, sensational, that it just wasn't that bad. And he has since come out and very publicly is saying, hey, listen, I was wrong. This thing almost killed me. And basically, hey, everybody needs to take this seriously and do what you need to do to protect yourself. So those are all the things that happen on the national front. Now, you may remember Representative David Byrd from several articles in 2019. And I can't see any comments. If people are commenting for whatever reason, I can't see them. So I'm just going to keep on rolling. But in 2019, you may remember that Representative David Byrd also, he came under fire because three separate women had accused him of sexually assaulting them when they were 15 and 16, and he was their basketball coach, their high school basketball coach. And these women have gone into, vivid detail about, what took place between them and him when he was a coach. Now, a lot of people, and I hear this often when people talk about, well, why don't women come forward when it happens and da 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 da. And without going into a lot of detail, understand that he had a position of authority as a teacher and a coach, right? As a coach. And these were young girls who did not believe that they would be listened to, that they would be believed. Now, one of those women, Christy Rice, had a telephone call with David Byrd. And she released the recorded phone call. She had secretly recorded that phone call between the two of them. And in this private recording, this is the one thing that here's some of what he says. He apologizes without specifically admitting guilt for what she accuses him of, which is sexually assaulting her. And here's what he says, and I quote, "I can promise you one thing. I've been so sorry for that. I've lived with that, and you don't know how hard it has been for me." He goes on to say throughout this phone call, quote, "I wish I had a do-over because I promise you I would have corrected that and that would have never happened." Now, he doesn't say what that is, but the conversation that they're having is about him sexually assaulting her. And then he says, "But I hope you believe me when I say that it's one of those things that I think about all the time, and I always ask forgiveness for it, and I hope you forgive me." He says, "It's one of those things I've really beaten myself up, and I don't know if you believe that or not, but I do all the time. There hasn't been a Sunday that's gone by when I'm doing my communion and everything, and I'm asking for forgiveness for sins, my sins. That's one of the things that I do." So why do I bring that up? Because I find it really, I'm going to test my comments. I find it really interesting that, when the media talked about him today and about him admitting that he was wrong about COVID-19, my sentiment to that is, well, I wish he'd be as honest about his mistake with COVID-19 as he, was about sexually assaulting young girls when he was a basketball coach. So moving right along, my comments seem to have posted, but I still can't see yours. So I don't know if you're commenting or not. But I want to go on to some regional news, some things that impact you guys where you might be. Now, I am from, hey, Christy, I can see that comment. Thanks. I am from Northeast Tennessee. And so that region where I'm from and where I, led a peaceful protest advocating for healthcare is Northeast Tennessee, Southwest Virginia. And over the weekend in Southwest Virginia, I'm not sure if you are aware or not, but the KKK, the Loyal White Knights, carried out what appeared to be a recruiting effort in Scott and Wise counties. They traveled throughout the counties, leaving plastic Ziploc bags, hey, Christy, with recruitment flyers in plastic bags with corn in them to weigh them down. To give you an idea, those bags, the flyers said things like, "White American citizens, we are working to avoid civil war. Common sense, white nationalism will defeat a socialist USA, join the KKK." And then it proceeds with all their contact information. Another flyer said, "Precedent to destroy Mexican drug cartels, Mexican expedition, U.S. Army led by Pershing, quote, kill them all, join the KKK." There was another flyer that talks about black on black crime, Antifa, critical race theory, and, pray for white Americans. So those of you who may be in Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia, it looks like the KKK is definitely, trying to kind of increase their recruiting efforts. Like I said, they delivered these out through Scott and Wise counties, over in Coburn and Dungannon and so forth and so on. I believe that a bag was even left on the sheriff's driveway, and they immediately turn this information over to the people that that need to be aware of it. So it's always interesting to see that. Growing up there, I'm used to it. Christy, you said you have Mexican children, right? It's just, it's something that happens. It's just, when people say, oh, well, racism is dead and those things don't happen anymore, then no, they do. They do. They're very real, and they're prevalent. So continuing and moving right along, I'm going to kind of get into the meat and potatoes of tonight's broadcast. So I want to talk about two physicians, Dr. Denise Sibley and Dr. Sean Oxenbein, who appear to be affiliated with Ballad Health. Now, let me just say this: when Dr. Denise Sibley spoke at the Washington County School Board last fall, and she was talking about masks and mandates and COVID and this and that, Ballad Health put out a tweet because people were saying she's on their website. I do not know if she was at that time or not. I can tell you that she's not on their website today. But Ballad Health put out a tweet on October 17th, 2020 that says, Dr. Sibley is a community physician and not employed by Ballad Health. This in no way reflects the views and advice of Ballad Health. We encourage our communities to follow local mask mandates and advice from the CDC. Now, I quoted their tweet today and then responded back to Ballad Health, because here's what's interesting. While she may not be, quote unquote, employed by Ballad Health, her husband is. Her husband appears to be Dr. David Sibley, who is a pathologist. And my understanding is that he has a substantial pathology contract with Ballad Laboratories. The two of them, Denise and David Sibley, were responsible for putting together like this prayer vigil last, I believe it was like towards the end of September. They did an interview with WJHL and so forth and so on. So here's why am I saying this? Okay. Well, first of all, Dr. Sean Oxenbein is a Ballad Health doctor. He is currently on their website. I can tell you what his information says. His information at Ballad Health's website says clinics, Tri-Cities Regional Emergency Physicians PC, listed at 300 MedTech Parkway, Johnson City, Tennessee. The hospitals that he works in are Franklin Woods and Sycamore Shoals, according to what's on the Ballad Health website, or at least what was on it this morning when I pulled this screenshot. In addition to that, Dr. David Sibley, in addition to being a pathologist working for Ballad Health, he's also a clinical professor at East Tennessee State University. You can find him listed under pathology at the Quillen College of Medicine. Here's where it gets interesting to me. His certification is in anatomic and clinical pathology, the American Board of Pathology, so forth and so on. Both the college, the Board of Medical Colleges has put out information regarding masking, regarding mandatory vaccines, and all of that. So has the American Academy of Pediatrics. So has the CDC. And what really irritates me is you have these physicians in this community that they know already has a medical monopoly, and you have them joining an organization like Tennessee Stands right alongside Bud Halsey, right? Your state representative there in Kingsport and Sullivan County area, right? And you have them touring the country speaking about anti-vaccinations, mandatory masks from their website. If you go to the Freedom Matters Tour website, it says, and I quote, "If you're tired of the perpetual masking, medical privacy invasions, indoctrination in schools, or election integrity being compromised, here is your opportunity to stand and be counted." This is what Sean Oxenbein, now listen to me, Sean Oxenbein does work and is currently on the Ballad Health website. This is a physician who just joined the Turning Point USA and is participating in giving teens talking points against vaccine mandates. Like, this is really happening. Now, you might be saying, so I don't get it. I don't believe in vaccines. Listen to me, folks. If you are letting your health be dictated by politics, you are doing yourself and your children a disservice. In addition to all of this, are y'all hearing all of this? So listen to me. If you're a doctor and you are putting out information that is contradictory to all sound medical science, and you don't have access to the data that these individuals are making these decisions on, I'm of the opinion you do not deserve to have a medical license, because you are in fact doing harm. You are spewing disinformation and misinformation, and you are doing it intentionally and along party lines. And that is not what doctors are supposed to be. Let me just be real clear about that and my stance. So I talked to two physicians today. One of them, a really respected pediatrician who I'm very excited is going to be on the broadcast in the next 2 weeks. And I talked to another expert who works at a prominent medical hospital / university, is all I'll say. And I spoke at length with both of them to make sure that I was understanding some information that I read and watched today several times. And this is what I was referring to in the teaser earlier. So I've seen a lot of people say, well, vaccinated people are getting COVID, so the vaccine doesn't work. Not true. I want to talk about like how this actually works so that we understand. So first and foremost, understand that the vaccines that we are getting right now, that we have been getting, were developed based on the COVID-19 alpha variant. And as COVID-19 has spread, it has mutated, and we now have a Delta variant. Okay. The Delta variant first became detected in the United States in March. Okay. That's when we first detected it here in the United States, was in March. What we now know is that the Delta variant is like much more efficient at being transmitted from person to person. Okay. Now in May, when the CDC said, hey, listen, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask indoors. The reason is the data that they had up until that time, which was very little Delta variant data, but mostly alpha variant data, the data up until that time said that the people who were vaccinated, right, if they got COVID-19, did not have a lot of viral load in their nasal pharynx. Okay. So the amount of viral load in your nasal pharynx, because things are it's transmitted by our nose and our mouth, right? So the viral load back in May was very little compared to unvaccinated people based on the data that we had at that time, which was primarily alpha variant data with very little Delta variant. Okay. So that is why 2 months ago, the CDC said, hey, if you're vaccinated and you're indoors, you don't have to worry about wearing a mask. Okay. What has happened since then is you have had, first of all, summertime, people out by the bajillions without masks, and the Delta variant, which is now accounting for 80 to 85% of all COVID cases, and in some areas over 90%, right? But that Delta variant, now they are collecting data in real time. And after 2 months of analyzing that Delta variant data, what the CDC has now determined is that the amount of viral load in your nasal pharynx is almost the same for a vaccinated and unvaccinated person, which means either one of us can spread the virus about the same. Now, that does not mean that you're going to have the same severity in symptoms and illness. And here's why. So, when you talk about the antibodies that your immune system needs to protect itself against the virus, okay, the amount of antibodies that is needed to protect your nasal pharynx and your upper respiratory system is significantly higher than what your body needs to protect your lungs. So the antibodies that vaccinated people have, it's going to protect their lungs, right? Which is why they're not getting hospitalized. It's why they're not getting pneumonia. It's why they're not having to be put on ventilators most of the time. So that is why people who are vaccinated can still transmit the virus as easily as unvaccinated people, but at the same time, they don't get as sick because the antibodies in their system from the vaccine are protecting their lungs. And this upper respiratory system, they don't have enough antibodies to protect all of it. So understand that no vaccine is 100%. It's not designed to keep you from getting it completely, right? There are going to be breakthrough infections. And when there are, what you need to remember is that you can still give it to other people just as easily. However, your symptoms are not going to be as bad and you are less likely to be hospitalized or die. Does this make sense? And does everyone understand that the change is because one data was based on the Alpha variant and the new data is based on the Delta variant? And here's what people need to understand is that if we continue to not get vaccinated and this disease continues to spread, it will mutate again. Currently, we have about 100 million people who are refusing to get vaccinated for whatever reason. And what will happen if this continues is it will mutate again. And I will tell you that I have spoken with, like I said, 2 physicians today in very prominent positions, one of them a pediatrician, and this Delta variant is impacting children. There are children in ICUs right now because of COVID-19 and this Delta variant. So when Cameron Sexton, the Speaker of the House in the state of Tennessee, and Governor Bill Lee have a press conference like they did today, and they threaten schools who take the American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines and they enforce mask mandates, right? They have threatened those schools. Cameron Sexton said that if schools issue mask mandates, or if they try to separate children who are vaccinated from non-vaccinated, he will call for a special session. He will ask Governor Lee for legislation that allows parents to take their private vouchers and take their children to whatever school they need to. And according to Cameron Sexton, the Speaker of the Tennessee House, he said, and I quote, "There needs to be a message to school systems that it is unacceptable to close schools or systems in our state." Not that it's unacceptable to have our children in intensive care units, not that it's and I get the fact that it is trying and difficult and all of that to have mask mandates, but for goodness sakes, our children need in-person learning because they need each other and they need that peer contact, right? And they need to be able to do it in a safe environment. Period. Those are the things that need to happen. Okay. Now, I want to talk to you all about the next part of this. All right. The next part of this broadcast I have encouraged everyone to watch. Um, I have encouraged everyone to watch the documentary 13th because it explains very clearly and very concisely that the 13th Amendment does not, quote unquote, really abolish slavery. It gives you a big, broad out. And a lot of our states still have laws on the books in the Constitution that allows slavery. So recently, there was a piece of legislation that was passed in the Tennessee House that would abolish slavery and ban slavery under all circumstances in the state of Tennessee. Once Governor Lee signs it, it will go on the it will be up for you to vote on. It will be on the ballot in November 22. Okay. I'm about to introduce an individual to you all by the name of Max Parthas. Max Parthas is a poet. He's a spoken word artist. He's also an abolitionist. He is currently, let me pull this up for you. He is currently the acting director for the Paul Cuffey Abolitionist Center in Sumter, South Carolina. He's the state operations organizer for the Abolish Slavery National Network. That's abolishslavery.us is the website. And he's the co-host and executive producer of Abolition Today. Max he lives and breathes this stuff, and he is way more knowledgeable about it than I am. And he was the perfect person. I didn't even know Tennessee had this resolution until I talked to him. And I was already inviting him to participate in the podcast because I felt like this was something that everyone needed to know about. So I want to take a second and introduce you guys to Max. I appreciate you for joining me.
Hey, Danny, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm really happy to see the work that you are doing as well, and also a little saddened as to how it recently turned out. But yeah, you've been fighting back against that KKK over there in Tennessee.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it started, because of the advocacy around healthcare issues and the medical monopoly that was created back home. And, and at the same time, prior to going back home, I was already talking about social justice issues and election issues and laws and all of those types of things. And so when COVID hit and it was going to be really hard to advocate where healthcare is concerned, I went back to talking about those things. And it just so happened that's when Ahmaud Arbery happened and George Floyd happened and, Breonna Taylor happened. And there was a lot of people who'd gotten used to following me because of healthcare weren't used to me talking about those other issues. So there was a little bit of friction. But my goal now is to kind of talk about everything in one broadcast, right? So I still want to talk about healthcare and advocacy, but I also want to introduce people to other things. So I'll give you just a second to tell people a little bit about you, whatever I didn't cover, and then we'll dive right in.
Well, you covered all my little titles I got going on. Two of the main things, though, is one, I'm helping to end slavery in the United States for the first time in our history. We've never ended slavery, like literally. And for those that say, there may be an exception like they did in Tennessee, but it's been abolished effectively and nobody practices slavery, to think that no one would exploit a loophole like that immediately after Reconstruction is very naive. So it's good to know that we've abolished slavery now in 4 states. Mm-hmm. We've got 2 states, Tennessee being one of them, on the ballot already for 2022. And there's another 8 states that are going through committee to get the same thing done. And that's just the ones with the paperwork, so to speak. There's
so what are the 4 states? What are the 4 states that it's already abolished in?
Rhode Island, Colorado, Utah, and Nebraska.
Okay.
Right.
Now, when I want to help kind of educate people who may or may not be aware. When we talk about a loophole in the 13th Amendment, explain to the people what that loophole is, so that they understand that it's in the United States Constitution and it's in our state constitutions as well.
Well, we call it the exception clause, and it traces all the way back to 1777. 1777, the first state to incorporate an exception for prisoners to become slaves or to be used as slaves was in Vermont. And in Vermont, theirs was so crazy, it said that you could be a slave not only for punishment of crimes, but also for debts and the like. So whatever the hell the like means, you can be a slave for that. And it's still in their constitution today. As a matter of fact, they're one of the states that is removing it. So from 1777 all the way to 1875, it went through about 7 different iterations. As a matter of fact, Lincoln was directly involved with 3 of them. So he was very familiar with the exception clause and what it was used for. And he even wrote a letter to Justice Stevens, who became vice president for the Confederacy, and told him that the only difference between the North and the South was that in the South, they wanted slavery to be legal for everybody. And in the North, they wanted it to be restricted. And what he meant restricted was using convict leasing like they had already been doing in the North. And so when we got to 1865, after the Civil War, here comes that exception clause. They figured, well, what we're going to do now is we're going to stop the southern states from being able to own people, but we're going to allow the state to do it, or the county, or the city. Whoever's doing the incarcerating, once you've been legally convicted or duly convicted, you are now state property. And that was mainly after Reconstruction and during Reconstruction in order to exploit free labor from the same people who were just slaves previously.
So that's the part that I really want people to understand, is that when people talk about slavery, I don't think that they tie in the economic factor that goes along with it. So you have a country that was built on and relied on the free labor of people of color. Black and brown people provided the labor that made America economically flourish. And so at the end of the Civil War, when that was no longer going to be the case, you have to find a way to replace that labor, right? So what's the easiest way to do that? It's to write a law that sounds like you're getting rid of slavery, and then give yourself a loophole to still be able to arrest and take these same people, target the same people that were giving you this labor before, lock them up, and now you can legally have the same thing, and then you can still finance this country. And that's why that's the problem with the prison system that we currently have today.
Tennessee Coal and Iron was one of the biggest exploiters of convict leasing. Historians say that convict leasing was worse than slavery. Now that's saying a lot when you think about slavery, like all the horrors that involved. Well, the same horrors were involved with convict leasing. The only difference was they had no concern whether you lived or died anymore, or if you made babies or not, if you were healthy or not. They would literally work you to death. And if you died using black codes and pig laws, they'd just go out and round up some more Negroes to go ahead and put to work. Last night on our program, Abolition Today, we were talking about at one point, 1 in 4 of those who were subject to convict leasing was either adolescents or minors. So they were working children to death in these coal mines and iron mines and railroads, especially during the King Cotton period. You know, after the cotton gin in 1789, we had 700,000 people who were enslaved in this country at that period. By the time 1865 rolled around, there were 4 million. And the reason because of that was the expansion of cotton. At one point, cotton was 60% of this nation's total trade. Was 60% of it was cotton.
Wow. So when people say to you now, and they hear you say, I'm an abolitionist and we are working to abolish slavery, right? What's the common responses that you get from people?
There's I'll give you 2 of them. The first one is, well, what we're going to do about those rapists and the murderers that are in there, because there's really rapists and murderers in the world. You want to let them go? And the answer to that is simply no. That's not what we're trying to achieve. First of all, you got to change your mind about what you're thinking. You're assuming by saying something like that that the United States would never unjustly incarcerate anybody. They would never round anybody up and put them in the cells for profit. They would never work anybody for free. That's what you're saying when you say that. And we can show you that at least half of our prison population right now are unjustly incarcerated. As many as 70% are unjustly incarcerated. So for those that commit these horrible crimes and they need to be separated from society, we're all for that, but in a more humane circumstance than what we put them through now. We don't
So
have to be monsters to deal with monsters.
and so God, I love that. You don't have to be monsters to deal with monsters. So one of the things that, like what you just said is, and so what I would do is I would replace the word but. When you said we want to do that, but we want to do it and we want to do it more humanely.
Yes.
So when you say to people, I can show you that 50% of the population is unjustly incarcerated, tell them where you get that data and how you know that.
I will give you a couple of really big stories that people can easily Google. That way you can look it up for yourself. One was the Kids for Cash scandal that happened in Pennsylvania, where two federal judges pled guilty to selling as many as 5,000 children to a for-profit private prison. They were sending children to these juvenile detention facilities without lawyers in attendance, without parents in attendance, for things like throwing steak at their stepfather or writing on their school desk. At least one child committed suicide while he was in there. They found out that the judges were getting back millions of dollars in kickbacks for each child that they were sending to this for-profit prison. The prison made about $1 billion, and they were fined $80 million. They're called Merkel, and they're still in existence today. The two judges are in, well, one of them still in prison. The other one was released out of compassion for COVID because he's an elderly man who is in prison and subject to COVID after selling 5,000 children. That's just one, and that's just one case. Now, you know this is happening all across America and has happened. The other one had to do with crime lab technicians. In Massachusetts, there was this crime lab technician called Annie Dukes, I believe it is, or something like that. You'll be able to look it up. And she was responsible for falsifying as many as 60,000 drug and alcohol cases. She was getting an incentive. They provided an incentive in Massachusetts as well as 13 other states. For every positive drug or alcohol test that you give, they give you a kickback to the tech or to the tech's office. So she had done that like 60,000 times, ruined people's lives.
This is from Duke University's law website. I just posted it in there. And so her name was Annie Ducan. Yes. Yeah. And so this is from 2016. She was released in May of 2016, and all she served was 2 years and 4 months of a 3 to 4 year sentence after pleading guilty to faking laboratory tests that may have affected 1,000 or more criminal cases. Dozens of defendants were released from prison in the aftermath of the scandal. And it's believed that a lack of a prior criminal record led to her early release. You and I both know what led to her early release, but whatever.
The 1,000 that they're talking about is only the ones they've investigated. She has affected as many as 60,000, but they refuse to look anymore because they don't have the manpower to check out every single case that she's ever touched, they said. So that means she's walking free, and people who she potentially put into prison with these false drug reports are still there. So that's just two examples in 2 states.
Well, and I think it goes back even further than this, because I think what sometimes people forget is that by the time you reach in the criminal justice system, by the time you get to the DA, you're no longer talking about just a public servant. You're talking about a politician, right? You're talking about people that are elected into office. And when you get a lot of these people get elected and based on their crime rates, based on their conviction rates, based on all of those things, your mayors or whatever. And so I don't know if it's just, we didn't have the manpower to look into the other 59,000, but it's who was the chief of police, who was overseeing the lab at the time, who was the mayor at the time, who was whatever. And a lot of this stuff is, hey, we're not gonna investigate too deeply because we really don't want to uncover who all should have known and probably did know in some of these circumstances with many of these cases.
Exactly. And as I said, there's just 2 cases that people know about. They're very well known. But it happens that way and in far more other ways. Prison, especially warehousing bodies, is very profitable, particularly in northern states. In New York, to warehouse the body of Khalif Browder, who was 16 years old when he was incarcerated and sent to Rikers Island, an adult prison, hell on earth, for the accusation of a backpack, cost $353,000 a year just to put him in that cage. Now, they wouldn't help him or his family who lived in
No.
poverty prior to that. But the moment he was accused of stealing a backpack,
That money.
he was worth $350,000 in investments every single year. And then they put him through that, what they call bullpen therapy, where they will force you to take a plea bargain and to
Yes.
plead guilty to crimes that you have never committed. And he stood up against that for 3 whole years. You know, we have a Sixth Amendment that guarantees us to a fair and speedy trial by a jury of our peers, as well as competent counsel, and he received none of that.
No. The
None of
thing
that.
with Khalif is that he was okay. So when you read his story and you understand what happened, Khalif was on probation because at 15 he'd gone for a joyride in what turned out to be a stolen bread truck. Right? He was in the passenger seat with someone else.
A bread truck.
Right, a bread truck, not robbing no bank, not any of that, right? Just a freaking joyride in a truck. And so when he gets accused of this stealing this backpack, whatever, by a gentleman who ends up leaving the country, returning back to Mexico, isn't even around to testify, right? And the DA's office knows this, the state knows this. When he goes into prison, they didn't have, I believe it was $900 that he needed for bail. His mother didn't have it. His mother had a severe heart condition, so forth and so on. And at the time, the father refused to give it to them. Well, a couple of days later, when the father says, okay, I'll give you the money, they call the bail bondsman, and this cash bail system, right? They now say, oh, he's not eligible, right? His bond has been revoked because he's on probation. Because at 15 years old, he took a deal. He took a deal for taking a joyride, right? And that's how he ends up getting sent to Rikers with no bail available to him. And the state continued to push that case off, knowing they did not have a witness. He was sent, I believe his longest stretch was over 300 days straight in solitary confinement as a child, which is torture. It's inhumane. It is illegal, like even for us to do that to prisoners of war. And so that's the reason that Barack Obama said that no minor now, no child can be put in solitary confinement. But, you know, by the time Khalif got out, he was so done. And this is where a lot of people don't realize when we talk about this justice system that we have. Rikers Island, the guards there had a system that they called the program. So they would ask you, are you down with the program? And if you said no, which Khalif said no, that meant that you weren't down with doing dirty stuff for the guards, right? And then Khalif refused to join a gang and he refused to take a deal. So that baby had no one. They beat him. They put him in solitary confinement. And by the time he got out, he was so mentally destroyed, he hung himself.
And then his mother died after that.
And his mother died after that. Sure did,
Right.
because she was only operating with what, like 20% of her heart
Yes.
was only operating at the time. So, and then when he got out and people like Rosie O'Donnell and all these people were interviewing him, people in the neighborhood on the block thought he had money. So then he gets stabbed because there's somebody just trying to rob him thinking he has money. Like he believed that he was cursed. And this is just one example. But I was not ready when I watched that documentary, Max. I wasn't ready at the end. If you remember, and I remember this so vividly, because at the end of that documentary, they began to show clips, back-to-back clips of unarmed black men being shot and dying. And I literally just wept. I don't think that people understand that, yes, there are good people doing these jobs, but there are so many people in these jobs and in these positions and the people orchestrating these systems that aren't good. They are selling children. They are engaging in, convict leasing and mass incarceration and all of it for the dollar. So when we say slavery still exists,
that's what we mean. You're literally buying and selling human beings. You're hunting them in the streets after criminalizing them, capturing them. Sometimes you kill them or brutalize them along the way, and then you funnel them into a system where they have no way of ever escaping, and you're forcing them to plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit. I mean, let's talk about that for a minute, right? Okay. The Sixth Amendment is a constitutional right that we enjoy as U.S. citizens. It's supposed to be guaranteed. People die in wars and go out and fight and wear uniforms because that's our rights. We're supposed to be defending, right?
Right.
But 95% of all cases end in a plea bargain. So if only 5% of the cases are going to trial, that shows that the Sixth Amendment is a myth. There's not enough evidence to prove that it exists in the way it's supposed to exist. And let me add a little bit more to that. While they're forcing these people into prisons using plea bargains, who's doing that? Well, 95% of all prosecutors are white. 95% of all prosecutors are white, and they're sending people directly to jail, don't pass go and collect $200. Majority of minorities using an illegal plea bargain, which is a constitutional violation. And it happens every day, all day long.
And so, but here's what's so smart. So America, the government, in my opinion, is ridiculously good at marketing, right? Ridiculously good. When you control the media and the movies and the shows and all of that, right, then you're able to skew the way that people view things. So here's what we've been taught. We've been taught, based on like the First 48 and Law and Order SUV and CSI, that anyone who goes into the police and they ask for a lawyer and they refuse to talk to the police, then that means they're guilty. Because you wouldn't ask for a lawyer if you didn't do nothing. Hell, if you knew how the system worked, yes, you would ask for a lawyer and don't say nothing, right? And I mean, but that's what people think. If they ask for a lawyer and they don't talk to the police, then they're guilty, right? We're taught so many things that just aren't correct. But you get rich, especially rich white people, you don't see them talking to no police. You see them all day long. Talk to my attorney, talk to my attorney, talk to my attorney. But it's a system that is definitely there that is causing harm. You said something else that I want to go back to when you said you don't have to be a monster to deal with monsters. I think that our criminal justice system, I know that our criminal justice system has lost its humanity. We think that because people do bad things, they are automatically bad people. And I'm not saying that there aren't quote unquote bad people. Usually those people though have some sort of mental deficiency that, either makes them lack empathy, makes them a sociopath, makes them something like that. But I know people, I believe that one of the fastest ways that we could cure crime and violence is to end poverty. What do you say to that?
It's like saying we should end the war on drugs. We know that the war on drugs was not actually a war on drugs. Mm-hmm. According to Ehrlichman, Nixon's chief aide, it was specifically aimed to incarcerate Black people. And what they called war protesters, which is something that is transient. We're always going to be Black, but the war could end and there's no more war protesters. So it was aimed at Black people, and we saw how that turned out. Right. Yeah, I know that you said that it's what did you call it, inhumane? Mm-hmm. It's inhumane. Well, we call it a crime against humanity. And we're charging that legally. It's a crime against humanity recognized by over 151 nations on Earth. That's happening right now in the United States of America. But we also got to be real careful not to assume, as I said earlier, that everybody who's behind bars or incarcerated or on probation or parole or in detention centers are actually guilty of the crimes, or even that it was a crime at all. In 2017, there were more people arrested for personal possession of marijuana than for all violent crimes combined. There are right now over 100,000 people in our prisons who have been wrongfully convicted, and everybody knows it, that they're wrongfully convicted, and yet they're still in prison trying to get out when they never did anything. How do you reform someone who never committed a crime? How do you do that?
I don't know that you can. And the way that people are treated when they go into this system is not like you're a human being. No one cares. It's of course you're innocent. It's that BS. Everybody says they're innocent. Well, the truth is at least half of them are, right? But it's we have this mindset that once somebody is convicted, then that automatically means they're guilty.
Right.
And that's not always the case. I don't think that people know the statistics behind eyewitness testimony and how inaccurate eyewitness testimony is. The brain is a funny thing. What it believes it sees compared to what it really does sees. If you really want to astound yourself, start to read up on the actual effectiveness of eyewitness testimony and how many times it's wrong. So, I there's so much that goes into this. It's got to be like, having been on my end, doing the protest around healthcare and feeling like it's such an uphill battle. Where do you get the fortitude and the determination to stick with it and do what you do for as long as you've done it?
I am the father of 10. I have 19 grandchildren.
Wow.
In my sons, the statistics that 1 in 3 young black men are going to go to prison, that happened to me. So I believe these statistics, and I have 9 grandchildren who are boys. And I can't imagine that it's virtually guaranteed that 3 of them are going to end up in prison because of the way the systems are set up today. Like, I've got to do something about that right now. I can't allow it. And I'm not saying I'm being completely selfish that it's just for my family, but before I had those 19 grandchildren, I was still fighting for yours, you know, because this is wrong. It has to end. Our people need to see something we've never seen before, which is freedom, not just conditional freedom. We want to be able to walk out in the streets and not think that some Karen or Ken is going to vicariously use a telephone in order to murder us via cops. We don't want to think that because we're doing something that is either culturally something we do, like sagging pants or smoking weed or whatever it may be, that we're criminalized because of it, and now we have to worry about going to prison over $1 worth of weed or our pants sagging. People have been murdered by police because of sagging pants laws. Like, literally, that's happening to. We don't want that. We also don't want to be fined and feed into oblivion either, because they do that to us all the time. They extort us like nobody's business. Here in South Carolina, I believe it's 2015, they wrote over 3 million tickets at about $200 a pop. Think about how much money they're making. And it's not their communities that they're targeting. When I say their, I mean those who are prosecutors and judges and all of those. It's not that. It's our communities that they do. And we don't have it. And that creates this pathway. When you can't pay the fines and fees, guess what happens? You end up in jail. And guess what happens if you still can't pay? You end up in a prison somewhere. And that's how we get funneled into this system. Right now, and this is horrifying to even imagine, 94% of all prisoners are men, first of all, right? Black people, black men in particular, make up nearly 40% of the prison population. We only represent, if you don't count the children, like 4% of the national population, but we represent 40% of the prison population. And you can go to places like Mississippi and Alabama where we're 70, 80 or more percent of the prison population.
So I want to talk about that for just a moment, because people inevitably bring up the whole black on black crime and the percentage of violent crimes that black people make up and so forth and so on. But in 2005, there was a Stanford University study that was done that showed an image of a black male face, no words, no nothing, just a black male face. And they showed that image to white people. And then they showed that image to black people. And 64% of white people had a reaction in their brain, which was fear. But here was what was astounding, is that 63% of black people had the same reaction, right? And so when I say that our government has been very effective in its marketing, right, we are conditioned to believe that the same way that we were conditioned to believe that Native Americans are savages, right? That black men are scary, that they are something to be afraid of. And so I think, this is just my personal hypothesis, is that black people have that same reaction to each other that white people have to us, which is why you see a lot of what you have, because we're human beings. And so our first and foremost, what do we want to do? We want to survive. So if I'm scared, if I have a fight or flight, then that's going to be my reaction, no matter And it's not that it's a conscious thing, right, from one Black person to another, but that literally is the conditioning of us as human beings in this country. And I think that that's often overlooked. In addition to that, I think that for us as a people, I think that there's been a lot of focus around Black people, around Black pride, right? We want to be very proud of who we are and our culture and how we are. And yet there's not a lot of focus on loving being Black art, just loving, and not the surface loving, but literally loving. Because if you love being Black, right, then we don't turn out people like Candace Owens and other things
Ben
like
Carson.
that. Yes, and Ben Carson. And so when people hear you, let me ask you this. Have you had people who are not Black or brown people, have you had people say, well, Max, you sound racist?
Yes.
What's your response to that?
I've had Black people tell me that, I should not focus exclusively on Black people, that I should make it very inclusive, that I should even appeal to things that might motivate white people to do something, like appeal to the economic disadvantages, the costs that's occurring, the jobs losses and things like that. But, what did I say a little while ago? The statistics happen to my children. It's going to happen to my grandchildren. Why should I not tell the truth? That it's happening specifically to Black people. Right. There's 1 million white men and 1 million Black men in prison right now, right? But there's 144 million white men. There's only like 20 million Black men. Right. It's a bigger difference. It's catastrophic when you take 1 million out of that small number who aren't even all adults. Only half of them are adults. So you're talking about 10 million men, and 1 million of them are in prison right now. That's catastrophic. So I've got to address that because, as I said, I don't want to happen to your children or my children anymore. It's too late. It's done. We got to finish that. And one way or another, we're going to get it done.
And when people say to you, because I'm sure they say it to you because they've said it to me, you'll never see it in your lifetime. My response is, yeah, but maybe we'll see it in my grandbaby's lifetime, right? If I don't see it, it doesn't mean I'm not going to do the damn work, right? Just like, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for everyone as a whole, because we all matter, and the generations to come matter. And if we don't do it, who will do it?
A friend was telling me it feels like spitting in the ocean sometimes. And I can understand that because we're literally up against principalities and powers right now. That's what we're fighting against. Mm-hmm. But I've seen it bleed. And if it can bleed, it can die. So we've cost for instance, the for-profit private prison industry has lost over $15 billion in the last 5 years. And we've been right in the heart of making that happen. At one point, they almost went out of business in a single day when the Obama administration announced they would no longer be using the for-profit private industry's contracts. Their stocks went straight down. And if not for Wall Street stopping trading, they would have went out of business that day. Right now, they're standing at a 50% chance of going bankrupt. Yeah, well, that's what we did to them. You know what I mean? Like, we're fighting back. We can beat this thing. They told me I was crazy for even thinking about how we could end slavery. But as I told you earlier, in the past 2 years, 4 states already abolished. 10 more on the table with legislation, and 20 more organizing behind that. Don't tell me what we can't do. We put in a federal resolution, a joint resolution called the Abolitionist Amendment, which is in right now, that will remove the exception clause from our 13th Amendment and finally make slavery illegal. So I don't believe in that nothing is impossible, something is impossible thing. I believe that in the history of all humanity, there's never been a time where one person's actions wasn't enough to make all the difference that was necessary to be done. I mean, it's a cascade effect. If I do something, other people get in, they do something. Yeah. And before you know it, we got a lot of raindrops that then turned into a hurricane.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Change can happen, and change is happening. So I hear a lot of people get really discouraged, and people talk about the times that we're living in. We hear that all the time. And where I'm from the Bible Belt, right? So you hear all the time people talk about, one day I'm going to get to heaven And, I'm going to have them streets of gold and life is going to be good. I'm going to be in my mansion. It might be hard right now. And we have been sold this bill of goods that earth, our time here, is supposed to be hell on earth. And it's okay if it is, because by and by, you'll get by. One of these days, it'll all be worth it. But I'm of the mindset that we can literally create the world that we desire if we choose to, and we put in the work right now. Saying it'll never happen, that's your scapegoat. Blaming everybody else, that's your way out, right? You're just taking the easy way out. Stop yapping and do the work. And when we all do our part, whatever that part is, right, then it can make a difference. Like right now, I'm aware that people that are watching you in my network, they're hearing a lot of things for the first time. I'm aware that there are some people watching you that are like, this damn Danny, I can't stand her. and, and they might be mad. But that's okay, because even if today what we've planted isn't some full-blown harvest by tomorrow, right? We've planted seeds today. And from this point forward, you can't say, I didn't know, right? It's now you know. And once you know, you are accountable for what you do with what you know.
That's the slogan for Abolition Today. You can never again say that you did not know. If you listen to our program even once, you will be very well informed. And we now on season 2, episode 32. We talk about every aspect of this, and we go into great detail on it and show how it's all connected. And we include music and poetry and discussion. So we have our swag going on. You know what I mean? If you get a chance, anybody's listening, go to abolitiontoday.org, and our archives are all available there. And if you really want to take even more action, you can help our efforts immediately, particularly those efforts in Tennessee right now, by going to endtheexception.com. If you go to endtheexception.com, you see a little short form. You just fill it out. It immediately will send a letter of support to your state legislators, as well as to the federal legislators behind the Abolition Amendment. Immediately, it will do that. And that's awesome. I've already gotten back a few letters of appreciation and thank you from the legislators saying, thank you for reaching out to me and letting me know about this. So you can do that right now at endtheexception.com.
And listen, folks, it's very hard for your legislators and your representatives to say why they can't get behind abolishing slavery. Like, that's a real tough sell to be able to explain why.
Ain't it though?
You know what I mean? How can your legislators say to you, no, I can't support that resolution? Of course they can. So remember, if you are in the state of Tennessee, this is going to be on your ballot in November 2022. And this is something that is good for all of us. Even back home where it's 95 and 97% white, right? You guys suffer because of the cash bail system. You guys have people in prisons because you don't have money, because of, there's a 20 to 30% poverty rate. This is something that everyone benefits from. Does it primarily impact people of color? Absolutely, right? Is this something that everyone can get behind? I believe so. And that is my hope, is that by sharing this information, we can make this change together. So Max, do me a favor, tell people where they can listen to you, where they can find you, what can they do in their city and state if they are not in Tennessee and South Carolina, those other places. Give us the spiel.
Sure. Just keep in mind that this is the beginning. This is the first step. We're doing something that has never been done, and that's ending slavery. And that opens up the door to many other things. It's like building a spaceship before going to space. You can't get there until you build the spaceship. So we're building this spaceship, so to speak, and it opens up all kinds of doors. We'll be able to challenge the conditions of slavery and slave-like conditions, badges, and incidents in cases in court where we no longer have this exception clause to protect it. And they can't say, it's all right. It says right in the Constitution, we can do this. They won't be able to do that anymore. So it's the beginning of other things. And if you want to help with our efforts, there's several websites that I'll give you. First, as I said, our program is abolitiontoday.org. We call it a masterclass on modern slavery abolition, and that pun is intended. The other one is the national organization that we've helped form, who's celebrating our birthday on the August 28th. And in 1 year, we have accomplished so much that it is just mind blowing. You can check us out at abolishslavery.us. And then finally, if you want to take action, like right now, go to endtheexception.com and just fill out that form and send a letter of support in. Show them that you're aware and you know. We're trying to end slavery. We're trying to start this beginning now towards something that we have never seen or had. We're creating a world that has never existed before, where slavery is illegal. So let's do it.
Yeah. And that's awesome. Like when I think about that, that gets me excited because I believe that we can create the world that we desire to live in for us, for our children, and for our grandchildren. You know, my grandbabies are intercontinental, right? They got a little bit of everything in them. But at the end of the day, when people look at them, all they see is their brown skin. And so I don't want them judged by that skin. I don't want them hurt because of that skin. I don't want them locked up because of that skin. We want these systems to change. So I appreciate you for spending time with me, and seriously, probably bring you back and share, because you are a wealth of knowledge, and there are a lot of people who just simply aren't aware of how we got where we are and what the things that we can do to change it. So I appreciate you. I appreciate everybody for tuning in tonight. Max, if you're good with it, I'm going to snip the audio from just this, and I'm going to put it on my Wednesday podcast. That's the audio version as well.
Yes. I just want to say thank you, Danny, for inviting me to have this conversation. I've been looking forward to it, you know, and I know you was mentioning about how your family just considered for their brown skin, and you also mentioned that international aspect. We call that prismatic, PRY, you know, living bridges between nations and peoples. That's what we call it. But yeah, it's not us. It's not us that decides who's black. If you're black enough to lynch, if you're black enough to kill, you're black. They decided, you know.
I've had people say to me, well, your mama's white. Yeah, I can promise you, though, I experienced the world as a black woman.
Right.
Because there's just enough melanin in my skin that's how I'm seen. And at best, they're not really sure what I am, but they know my ass ain't white.
Right, exactly. And you were their worst nightmare. They were afraid that people like ourselves who are of mixed descent would eventually take over as a heritage of what the white man had built. But yeah, I mean, if we do, it's not just us. It's because they're not supposed to have to begin with. It's all stolen. Right. The criminals who have committed crimes against humanity, and these people who, and I'm going to insult some of your listeners right now. I'm pretty sure I'm Tennessee.
Sometimes it's okay.
Who extol the founding fathers as so great. Like we said on our program last night, Thomas Jefferson was a pedophile rapist. Yes. He was raping his own niece at like 13, 14 years old at the same time that he was talking about all men are created equal. Like, how hypocritical can you get?
Yeah.
He's the guy who developed capitalism in the United States when he first wrote about how women were worth more than men, black women, because they could give birth, and that provided more capital. Yes. So, yeah, you know, it's about changing your mind about what you're really dealing with, what's reality and what's a myth.
Yeah, what have we been taught versus what is the actual truth?
Right.
Right.
And the truth will set you free, boy.
Sure will. And I keep telling people what we are experiencing right now is a shift, right? Because love is conquering, right? Love is conquering. Love is transcending all of these separations, right? And you have people like me and you and my grandchildren that are looking, and there's going to be more and more of that, right? Because that's just what happens. And so what you're seeing is this fear about what happens when there's a shift in power. What happens when the numbers aren't the same way? And what I keep saying is we have never treated, and neither have Native Americans and indigenous people in this country treated white people the way that they have treated us. And when I say white people, I don't mean all white people. I'm speaking to the powers in the system structure. So don't think that I'm calling all white people bad, because I'm definitely not. What I'm talking about is the systems and structures in this country. And even when given the opportunity, most of the time, we don't respond in kind. And I'll end on saying this, that you mentioned stolen land. After going to Standing Rock, my stance where Native American and Indigenous issues is real simple. I'm an ally. And I personally believe, because I believe in karma, I believe in the golden rule, I believe that what comes around goes around. I believe that as a country, until we do right by those individuals, by those people, we will never have everything that we are supposed to have. We have to right that wrong where they are concerned, as people, and we are still doing things very wrong today where they're concerned. So, and we won't even talk about how they're treated when it comes to prison systems and the laws and all of that.
Danny, the way this system is set up, it's like a three-legged stool. They control the narrative, the processes, and the resources. Now, we can't take control of the resources and the processes like immediately, but we can damn sure control the narrative.
Yes.
And when you control the narrative, now your three-legged stool is just something that's falling over. And that's where we're at right now, controlling our own narrative.
Yeah.
You don't get to tell us what slavery is. We know what it is. You don't get to tell us how to solve our problems. We know how to solve our problems. So it's our time. And let's control our narrative.
Absolutely. I appreciate you again. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I am out of here. I'll be back on Thursday night at 8 p.m. So make sure that you tune in, whether that's on Facebook or YouTube. You can also listen to the Rantings of Danny audio podcast, a new episode every Wednesday. You guys take care of yourselves. Mask up. Be safe, for goodness sake. Be amazing. Be light. Be love. Peace.
Peace.